This episode of the 46 of 46 podcast is sponsored by Crua Outdoors. Camp comfortably with the world's best insulated tents and outdoors gear. Check out their tents, sleeping bags, pads, and more at cruaoutdoors.com. That's CRUA outdoors.com. Crua Outdoors, the best night's sleep you'll have in the wild. This is the 46 of 46 podcast Summit Sessions, where we'll talk all things Adirondack, backcountry, and beyond. From high peak stories and adventures to trail tips and tricks, we'll dive deep into the heart of these mountains and the people who passionately climb them. Adirondack maps and spruce traps, bushwhacks and backpacks. It's all here on the 46 of 46 Summit Sessions. Welcome back to another edition of the Summit Sessions here on the 46 of 46 podcast and episode number 50. Man, 50 episodes. This week we'll be talking all things backpacking gear, along with the prep work that went into my own spring backpacking adventure here in the Adirondacks on the 138-mile Northville-Placid Trail. Backpacking versus day hiking may seem very similar, but they're very different animals in terms of the gear that you need. And once the overnight element comes into play, there's a whole new assortment of gear that comes into play with that. Sleeping bags, tents, pads, food, cookware, shoes, so many other pieces of gear that we need. And fortunately for all of you, I have the perfect person to talk gear with on this episode. Back by popular demand, Mr. Kenny Kendall. You heard him on the gear episode here on the podcast, and he was met with great praise. So I have him back here. He is basically an REI catalog with a mouth. Love talking with Kenny. I bounce all of my gear questions off him all the time. And Kenny is always gracious enough to answer all of my questions in such detail. So I have him here on the podcast today to talk all things backpacking gear. Kenny, thanks for coming back on the 46 of 46 podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, James. I'm really happy to be back.
You know, it's really nice to have a friend like you. It actually kind of reminds me of the movie Crocodile Dundee. So basically in that movie, there's one scene where it's actually in Crocodile Dundee 2, where these dudes, they're in Australia, and then the bad guys, more or less, come up to this one guy and they say, "Oh man, you should have brought more than a knife to this fight." And the guy goes, "Oh no, I don't need a knife. I got a dunk." And the guy's like, "A what?" And then this like big ogre dude comes out from behind the bush, and who has like 3 teeth, and he goes, "A dunk." And then he just levels them, slams them. So like, that's what I feel like you are for me in terms of gear. I don't need to do anything. I just ask you, and then I get the whole shebang from you about any piece of gear. And I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with me. So I'm stoked for you to come back here on the podcast.
Awesome thing, James. Thanks. I really appreciate it. And just for all our viewers, for our listeners, I'm sorry, for clarification, I have all of my teeth.
Yes, that's beautiful. But I wish you were Australian. That would be much better for me in this episode here. But have you been out hiking lately? What have you been up to?
So yeah, I've been doing some hiking almost daily, actually. There is a state park / wildlife management area that almost touches my backyard. It's not very well known about, so it shall remain nameless. It's in central New York. If you do your digging around, you can find it on Strava or Caltopo, and you'll probably know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a kind of a funky shaped area. Not a whole lot of established trails going through it, and I've been being good and keeping local and pretty much sticking to that.
Very cool. Very cool. You got to get outside. I've seen so many people staying inside, and I just say outside is way better than being inside, and everywhere there's somewhere you can go. So that's terrific. Speaking of being outside, so this episode here on the Summit Sessions is going to be a hybrid episode. It is going to be all about backpacking gear, and I am going to lay out the gear that I just used on my backpacking trip across the Northville-Placid Trail. So I just did the trail. I sectioned it out over a few weeks, And this is going to be all about the gear that I brought with me, the food that I brought, the clothes that I brought. I've seen a lot of people ask other Northville-Placid Trail hikers online about gear and what they use, and I found it to be worthwhile to do a whole episode based on here's what I used, take it or leave it. This is what I used, and I got through it successfully. So with that, and then with Kenny, who knows everything about all the other options and what I should have done better, he will enlighten us tremendously. So similar to the last gear episode we did with you, we're going to just go with starting from the bottom up. We're going to talk about clothing for backpacking specifically and all these overnight trips and everything. We're going to talk about gear, food, cooking, the whole shebang. Backpacking is very different from just going out for a day hike. So much more comes into play when you're staying overnight, when you're camping, especially on long distance trips too. You know, you can deal with the heavy pack for a few hours, but when it becomes your life over days or weeks, you know, every ounce kind of counts tremendously, wouldn't you say?
Yes, definitely. I'm not what you would call a gram weenie about it, but I do pay pretty close attention to weight. I'm not sitting in my car shaving the logos off my gear on the way to the trailhead at red lights like I've seen people doing on Reddit recently. But I definitely pay attention to how much things weigh. And when it comes to things like maybe cutting off extra straps and packing things differently, yes, it's definitely something you want to kind of get your loadout attuned to.
Sure, absolutely. And I am also not a gram weenie by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I am seemingly the opposite. I am an overpacker, and you obviously know that. I called you before pretty much every section with questions on like, what am I doing wrong? Why can't I get this pack down? What do I have that you don't think I need? And so, yeah, I am obviously not that. So I'm going to give a quick little bit of information here. So I sectioned out the NPT, which involved 4 hikes total. One of them was a day hike, and then the other 3 were overnights, either 3 days or 2 days. So on those trips, my very first trip, my pack weighed 43 pounds.
Ouch.
Yeah, 43 pounds. My second trip, it weighed 38 pounds. So we're down 5 pounds. And then my final trip, it was 35 pounds. And the funny thing is, 35 pounds felt like 20 pounds. It's my body definitely got accustomed to the heavy pack over the month that I was doing this. So 35 pounds felt like nothing. And I actually feel like that's probably similar to what my winter pack is like with snowshoes on them. So it actually kind of felt good. But the 43-pound pack, throwing that on every time we'd stop and take a swig of water, it was noticeable when I would haul that thing back on my body. And I should also clarify too, I am what I dub a heavyweight hiker. I weigh 230 pounds. So a 43-pound pack on me, or even a 30-pound pack on me, is drastically different than on a 130-pound person. So that's probably another reason why the heavier pack doesn't necessarily bother me as much. But a 30-pound pack on someone who weighs 130 pounds, that's a lot of weight on a person. So props to all of you who are out there with those heavy packs doing this backpacking thing. It is not easy by any stretch of the imagination. So we're going to get right into it. We're going to start with here's what I used, and then Kenny can talk about other things that exist out there and what I would do differently if I was to go back and either do the Northville-Placid Trail again or for another backpacking trip. So starting at the bottom, boots. So I wore my Timberland hiking boots that I wear 100% of the time when I'm hiking, whether it's in the high peaks or just walking on a trail with my dog. Same boots that I've hiked completely in. Now, if I were to go back and do it again, I would not wear my hiking boots. I would go a totally different route. I would go more with the idea of trail runners. And on top of trail runners, I would bring 2 pairs of them. So now a lot of people, the gram weenies out there are like, wow, 2 pairs of shoes? What are you talking about? When you're backpacking and you're out there, 20 miles a day here, go to bed, and doing another 20-mile day the next day. Man, putting on those boots the next day was just terrible. And I also learned that a shoe takes 24 hours to get its life back into it after it's been worn. And it probably takes a lot longer after you just walked 20 miles in them. The rubber and everything else and the foam inside of a shoe. So if I were to go back and do this trail again, I would, although of course I did a lot of it in the winter, snow conditions, so the trail runners may not have been ideal for that situation due to snow, but Kenny will tell us in a second if that's even possible, or maybe I don't know, maybe people wear trail runners in the winter more than I just hear people complain about seeing people wearing trail runners in the winter. But yeah, I wore hiking boots, the same boot across the 138 miles. I would definitely recommend 2 lightweight pairs of trail runners due to the fact that they dry really quickly, they're super light, and throughout the day you can be flip-flopping your shoes. You just have them clipped to your backpack. I had Crocs clipped to the back of my backpack with just really lightweight carabiners. So you could just have another pair of trail runners clipped to your pack, and that gets soaking wet. Just swap it, and especially in the summertime out there in the NPT or anywhere, they'll dry super quick on your backpack. And then you could just constantly throughout the day be flip-flopping your shoes, or just every other day. It's nice to not put the same pair of shoes back on, so you could put a new pair of shoes on and feel like a whole new person the next day versus putting your frozen boots back on your feet. And with that in mind, with frozen boots, so if I did do it again with my hiking boots, or you want to hike with your hiking boots, I highly recommend then bringing an additional insole for the shoe, and bring one that's not the exact same insole that's already in your shoe, because if you can put a new insole in the shoe, the boot kind of like feels slightly different now, and it would make the world of difference when your feet are sore, and that way they're not touching and getting rubbed in the exact same spot the next morning when you're going to bang out another 15 or 20 miles, and insoles weigh nothing. So yeah, that's something I would definitely recommend for this sort of backpacking adventure here. But what do you, that was a long-winded answer about boots here, but what do you like to use, Kenny, when you're out there?
I am a trail runner and approach shoe guy. So in my lifetime, I have had 2 ankle fractures and ankle sprain, and all of them were while wearing supposedly very supportive high top boots, during warmer weather. So I kind of gave up on the idea that higher top shoes equals more ankle support. And yet to some extent it does, but a lot of ultra athletes and endurance runners and very long distance hikers would basically tell you that really a better option than relying on your gear to support this joint in your body, you're better off just strengthening that joint. And it all kind of comes back to your core area about how your body mechanics are working, how you're actually controlling your extremities. So that being said, I like to go with the lightweight option. I'm a big trail runner guy. I like approach shoes as well. They both have some definite pros and cons versus hiking boots. But for me personally, if I'm going out in warmer weather, and they're not the gnarliest of possible conditions, in some cases, even if they are, give me a pair of Salomon XA Pro 3Ds, Salewa Wildfire Pros, or even if you're going to be going to an area where you're not going to get beat up too badly by, if you're not bushwhacking or something like that, even something like the Brooks Caldera would work just fine. I think that's my personal opinion. I've been using approach shoes and trail runners for a long time at this point. I just really prefer them to hiking boots. Yeah.
And, you've hiked the Northville-Placid Trail as well. So, you know what that trail is like as well. And there's a lot of sections, and obviously it depends on weather and whatnot. But if you're going out there in nice temperatures, or it's been like relatively nice, obviously there's going to be your muddy sections that are muddy at all times. But there's a lot of that trail that is just like, it's just a nice, delightful hike. And yeah, the boot, over 138 miles, the weight of the shoes are a lot more noticeable day after day than they are, just one day in the high peaks or something. So I would definitely go back and do it So I would definitely go back and do it differently. Excuse me. Trail runners is